Hi, welcome back to another deep dive with Colin. Today we're going to talk about something that is fundamental in our industry, coating a screen and getting a good working screen out of it. I was on Facebook the other day browsing through the print groups and I saw yet again another post with the question of how do I get a good stencil? I'm having XYZ issues. And for as long as I've been in the industry, which is over 25 years, this is a never-ending question. And I don't think it'll ever stop being asked. But my hope is, in this video, is to create enough of foundation for those of you watching that, you're gonna go, that made sense. I can accomplish this in my space. That this is gonna give you all the information you need to start now, whether you're brand new or you've been in business for 5-10 years and you just need a little bit extra help or a little bit of extra awareness in what's going on in coating a screen. So on the fundamental level, what we are looking at is simply putting emulsion onto our screen. This is the most common scoop coater that you're going to use. It'll have the sharp side and it'll have a round side. There's not a whole lot of difference between the two. The sharp side gives you more dramatic control over how much is laid down, and the round side allows for a little bit more emulsion to flow onto your screen. And when you're coating your screen, again, you're typically starting here, leaning your scoop coater forward, making contact. You're getting a zip, finishing up, tilting back, and then scraping off the edge. And then you rotate 180 degrees, flip it around, and then you'll do another coat. Taking your scoop coater, tilting it, making contact with the edges of the scoop coater, and coating. That is the basic fundamentals of coating a screen, as many of you have watched on many different videos or done yourself many a time. But where in all of this do the problems arise? The problems arise in somebody taking their scoop coater and just barely touching the screen here and not actually making full contact and not getting good pressure. If they try and angle back, they're going to scrape more than they're going to allow emulsion to go through the mesh. And the more you scrape, the thinner your stencil is going to become. So that's where we start to get into the, oh, well, do extra coats. Okay, well, 1, 2, flip it around and do 2 more. Well, all you did was scrape and take more time to coat your screen. Get that edge, get those edges in contact, apply a little bit of pressure, and go up. And so how do we confirm that we got a good layer of emulsion on our screen? This is something that I learned over 20 years ago, and it's called the glisten method. Quite simple, you're looking for a little bit of a reflection off of a light source where you can look to see if you've got full gloss over the layer of emulsion that you have there. If you have full gloss, that means that the emulsion has gone past the mesh and is now covering the mesh. You want that both on the t-shirt side of your screen and the squeegee side of your screen. You want to be able to look at both sides and go, yep, that's covered it completely. And then you set it into your rack to dry. Those are the basics of what you, the screen printer, this guy who's in the darkroom coating a screen, wants to look out for. Now, from here, if you've accomplished that, now this is where we start to get into all the variables of coating a screen. Let's go over some of the variables that you are going to encounter in the darkroom. I made myself a handy little cheat sheet here. You want to look at the solids content of your emulsion. You want to look at the viscosity of the emulsion. Some emulsion is very runny. Other emulsions feel more like warmed up honey. They are both going to coat the screen differently. You want to, of course, look at that round side versus the sharp side of your scoop coater, because that will have an impact on how much emulsion is applied to the mesh. We want to look at that, again, the angle of the application, your scoop coater, whether you are coating with a heavy angle down here on a heavy trough or a straight up coat. We also want to look at mesh count. Your lower mesh screens are going to take up a lot more emulsion, and your high mesh screens are actually going to repel some of that emulsion. You're not going to get much going through, so your techniques are going to change depending on the mesh count a little bit. To bring all that together, one of the first things that I want to talk about when we're trying to get a good stencil is that I want everyone to understand just how thin mesh is. I have here a little ruler. Each one of these lines is a millimeter. When we're talking about mesh and EOM, emulsion over mesh, it's always expressed as a ratio. You want 10% EOM, 20% EOM, whatever that is, it's always expressed as a ratio of the mesh count that you're using, how thick your mesh is. We're talking about microns when we're talking about there. 100 microns is 1/10 of 1 millimeter. Your average 110 mesh is about 100 microns in thickness. That is 1/10 of 1 millimeter. I want to make that very clear. Go grab yourself a ruler. Take a look at how thick 1 millimeter is. Now measure off to 1/10 of that spot. This stuff is thin, incredibly thin. That's what I want everyone to understand, that when we're talking about trying to be precise or controlled, this is challenging work. There's a lot that we need to do here. And then we start to talk about, of course, needing 20%. So we need to add another, on a 110, if I want 20% EOM, I need to add another 20 microns. That's 0.02 of a millimeter. Incredibly thin stuff. Now, to put that into perspective of what we start to talk about with EOM, people will say, oh, you only need about 20% EOM on a 156 mesh to get a good white ink. Okay, what does that mean? I don't have a tool, and I have a tool here for measuring EOM that I'll show you in a little bit. What does that really mean? What does that feel like? Well, I did a little bit of Google search yesterday, and when we're talking about the thickness of an average sheet of office paper, that's between 50 and 100 microns. So if you were to take a sheet of paper, put that on a screen and run your finger across it, it's thin. It's very thin. But that average sheet of paper, that's about what you're going to feel for a 20% EOM. It's actually a little bit thicker. So when you run your finger across the back of your screen to feel that stencil, you want to feel an edge, but you don't want to feel something that's dramatically thick, like a business card. And the business card is saying that's about 350 microns. So that is 3.5 times the thickness of a 110 mesh. So if you're running your hand across your screen and you're feeling like, whoa, yep, grab a business card, feel that edge, that's pretty thick. That's a lot of emulsion on the back of the screen. So if you're feeling something that thick, maybe you put too much emulsion on. So it's about finding a correlation for those of us who don't have a tool to go and actually measure it. Now, what does that mean? You talked about 110 and a 156 mesh. What does that mean when you get up to a 230 or a 305 mesh? It means that you're barely going to feel anything. A 230 and a 305, I actually just went and measured a 305. My 305 was measuring in at 51 microns. And after I coated that, I was at about 54 microns. Again, that's the whole thing, is the thickness of a piece of office paper. So again, very thin. When I expose that screen, I'm barely going to be able to feel an edge to my stencil when I'm done. But that's what that 5% EOM on high mesh counts means and what it feels like. So I wanted to give you a correlation of what these EOM percentages really feel like. On a 156 at 20% EOM, it's barely going to feel like the thickness of a paper. So I wanted that to be there in your minds as you're like, okay, wait, pause the video, go check my screens. Yeah, that feels good. That feels like what Colin was talking about. The next thing that's going to affect how thick your stencil is the solids content in the emulsion you're using. It's very easy to figure out what the solids content is. Go to the manufacturer of the emulsion you're using, look up their data sheet. A lot of them will even have it on their product page. For the Chromaline emulsions, we have them listed out on the product page. If you were to go to Chromaline themselves, right there on the product page, they tell you what their solids content is. And what that means, very simply, is that if you were to lay down an even coating of emulsion, as a percentage, if something like Chroma Blue, which is 50% solids, once that is completely dry, it's going to be half the thickness. So the example I gave earlier of coating a screen and looking for that glisten method, depending on the solids content of your emulsion, you're either going to get dramatic evaporation and shrinking of that emulsion layer, which can then look very dull. And if you were to put it under a magnifying glass or a loupe, you would see that the emulsion has shrunk into and around the threads, and it doesn't look like you have much of a stencil at all. So you'll see something dramatic like that, or you'll see it be perfectly glossy. So something like the Chroma Blue, which is 50% solids, is going to give you a lot more of that emulsion left over. And you'll get your stencil development, that good EOM, that nice sharp edge, that gasket of your stencil, really quickly. Where another product like Base Layer Complete is 44%. CP Tex is, as I go back to my notes, 42% when sensitized. Just as a note, whenever you're using sensitizer, the solids content goes down by about 2% because of the water that you're adding in. Other than that, if you're using a graphics emulsion, some of those are down as low as 25% solids, meaning that you'll get a perfect looking coat, beautiful glisten, and when it's done, it's actually shrunk into and around the mesh. You've got like 0 EOM. So your emulsion solids plays a big part in how good your stencil is once your screen is completely dried. You want enough emulsion on the t-shirt side of your screen to create a good gasket. You want that nice solid contact with the emulsion onto the shirt. So it's just a mechanical dropping of ink in a very nice format, like putting a Lego down. Within emulsions, you have viscosity differences. They're like in the Chromaline emulsions. They are very fluid. They flow really nicely. So if I'm taking my screen and I'm holding it down here and starting my scoop, that emulsion is going to flow through very easy if I have it down that far, as a dramatic example. Or if I keep it like this and have very tight control, that emulsion is still going to flow really nicely. But if I have a different emulsion that is a little bit thicker, a little bit more viscous like honey, I have to be really careful with the angles that I do this at. If I do a very sharp angle, that emulsion doesn't flow through the mesh very well. It wants to stay on the side that you're coating on. So do tests with the emulsion that you have. Do the 1-on-1, do the 2-in-1, do the 1-in-2, whatever it is. But write it down and then feel the edge of your stencil when you're done. You want to be able to control your variables. You can create fantastic screens with any emulsion out there on the market. It's just you just need to understand how to work with it. So let's go into round side versus sharp side of the squeegee really quick. As we talked earlier, and as many of you know, the round side kind of bull noses. It doesn't really hydroplane, but it doesn't cut very well. So if you are, well, no, we'll just take that standard coat, full good contact, and you're coating the screen, 1-in-1 both sides, you will lay down a little bit more emulsion in comparison to the sharp side with the same number of scoop strokes. So the sharp side of the scoop coater versus the round side. Given that you are doing the same number of coats on each side, the round side will give you a little bit thicker stencil. We're talking about 5% more EOM. It's not dramatic. What becomes dramatic is in how your angles and your pressures are applied. If you are using bad angles, you're back here scraping a little bit more, I can actually get more emulsion down with the sharp side of the scoop coater compared to that technique of pulling back a little bit on the round side. Because when you're pulling back, you're actually shearing more, which behaves more like the sharp side. So again, getting the scoop coater into that positive contact, press a little, and you'll get a good laydown of emulsion. So one more thing on this chain of variables is how full is your coating trough. Now I have the one that I've been using for 4 years. So you can see it's very well used. I can hold a lot more emulsion in this one than I can in this one. So when I take this and I go to coat a screen, by the sheer weight of emulsion that I have in here, as I take this, tilt it forward, that weight of emulsion is actually going to push through the mesh and is going to basically apply extra pressure to get through the mesh count. So as I coat, that is actually going to lay down a fairly nice amount of emulsion because of the weight of the emulsion that's in my coating trough. A lot of you may have recognized this already, that if you have just a little bit of emulsion, like you're at the end of coating screens, you're trying to get that last bit out, it doesn't give you the same stencil that a full trough will. So the last variable is, of course, your mesh count. And really what we're looking at when we're talking about mesh count is the open area of the mesh. So basically the hole that's in the mesh. The lower the mesh count, the bigger that hole is, regardless of what percentage it is. It's just bigger holes. So as you are coating emulsion through there, the emulsion is going to flow through really, really easy. So you're going to use either the sharp side or the round side of your coater, won't matter, but you're still going to do about a 2 and 2 because you've got all this mass to get through. So that thicker stencil or that thicker mesh just takes a little bit more to get emulsion through and fully encapsulated. But by the time you're done, you've got a stencil that's 2 to 3 times thicker than you will with a coated 305 mesh, just to give you an example of how much thicker, how much more is being done there. So lower mesh counts, that emulsion is going to flow through the screen really easy, especially on thin thread. Thin thread, that emulsion is going to flow through like butter or like water. As you go up on mesh counts, that hole opening gets smaller and smaller. And this is another place where the viscosity of your emulsion, that flow rate of the emulsion, is going to have an impact on how well you coat your screen. So if you've got an emulsion that flows really well, you will be able to get, again, a slightly thicker stencil of about maybe 3 to 5% thicker than if you were using a thicker emulsion, because that emulsion, that thinner emulsion just flows through much better. And again, this is an extreme example, something to give your brain a little bit to process on. So if I'm coating a 230 mesh, I'm only going to go 1 and 1. One, I don't want a whole lot of emulsion down. I want a 5 to 10% EOM. We're going for about half that overall coating thickness in comparison to a 156. Because we're not looking to lay down a whole lot of ink as we go up in mesh counts. We want to control that ink deposit, get it very thin and controlled. We typically are doing a lot more detail. So having that real controlled stencil is important. Almost never are we going to go 2 and 1 or even a 1 and 2. I mean, that's almost unheard of unless you're going for a very, very specific application. One last thing that I hadn't touched on, I touched on a little bit with the viscosity of the emulsion. It's just the speed of how fast or slow you coat a screen. So again, this goes back to, does your emulsion flow really easy or is it thicker like honey? If you are taking your scoop coater and you're like, all right, I'm here, I'm done, you're barely getting any emulsion onto your screen. If your emulsion flows really well, then yeah, you do want to coat a little faster. But if your emulsion is thicker, you need to give it a little more time to go through that mesh. And maybe you're coating about like this in order to get a good stencil. So again, this is something that you need to go back and play with. That's something that you need to go and do your various testing with the emulsion that you like. How many times am I going to coat a screen in order to get the stencil that really works for me? And maybe your stencil is thicker, more like a business card, and you get a perfect print out of it. Awesome, stick with that. Don't change it until you need to do something different. Just because the recommendation is 20% doesn't mean that's the rule. Remember, rules are meant to be broken in our industry. Do what works best for you. But if you're having problems, go back and look at your variables, understand as many of your variables as you can so that you can go ahead and make changes. Now, if you have the opportunity to buy one of these lovely little tools, there are several of them available on the market, anywhere from $500 to $800. There are cheaper models available, but they are more delicate. The components in them just aren't as durable. You know, if you drop it, or if you need to, put it in your car and travel someplace, or get on a plane and travel, sometimes they don't make it, they break. And that's just due to it being inexpensive, but they work. So if you get one of those, just leave it in your workspace and use it there. But how do we measure? First, we want to turn it on. And we're not gonna get a deep dive into how this works. It'll come with a backing in which you are going to put on the t-shirt side of your screen. And then you are going to take this sensor reader and you're going to place it on this side. We want to place the sensor reader on the thinnest part of the emulsion because it's actually really easy for you to take this and push it into emulsion, which is going to skew your reading. So the ghost is back. Oh, it's a Dia de los Muertos poster too. So we're going to push gently, just making contact. And my mesh thickness is saying 88, 87, 87. Give it a couple of areas. 88 to 87 microns. And if we were going to go back and look at what the mesh manufacturer's measurements are, that was right on point. I think the mesh manufacturer's reading on the Saudi 156 mesh, or sorry, 158 mesh was 86. So 1 to 2 microns difference. And literally that is a 2.5% variable off of what they wrote. And again, mesh is not always manufactured exactly the same. There are variables, of course, in all manufacturing. So that is how you measure your mesh thickness. After that, you want to measure the screen before it's exposed, sorry, your stencil before it's exposed, and get that thickness reading. So if that was 88, and then I measure it again with the emulsion on, and I've got a 100 micron stencil thickness, that's a difference of 12. Now, in order to find the ratio, I do this very simply. I don't do any kind of a formula. I do it in my head because I don't need to be anal retentive precise on this. I just take 10% of my mesh. So my mesh was 8.8. I'm going to round up to 90, take 10%, that's 9. And my total thickness was 100. So if I take 90, add on 9 to get a 10%, we're at 99. So my EOM on a 100 micron stencil is about 11, maybe 12%. And I go, oh, okay, well, I'll use this. I'll see how it works. And next time, I'll change my coating techniques a little bit. Maybe I did a 1-in-1 that time. I'll go and give it a shot, and I'll try a 2-in-1. I expect to get about 5% more EOM out of doing that. So instead of a 12%, maybe we'll be up at 15 to 17% EOM. And again, these are numbers that are based on my experience. Your experience may differ. If I'm looking for a really good 20% stencil, I will typically go 1 and 2, but I am also using the Monster Max, which has the sharper edge here. And it's a little bit more controlled than with the standard coating trough. So that was a lot of information. Hopefully it's segmented well enough so that you can go back and go, that's the part I need to watch again, and you get all the information out of it you need. If you have questions on anything I talked about, if I missed something that you were curious about, leave a comment. Throw it out here. We want to hear it. We want to engage with you. All right, that's it for our deep dive with Colin. Thank you all so much. See you in the next one.